Take a little rest. I was trying to remember when we first worked together. Was the first Juno? The first one was Juno. Grab the board out way back. I think I did it a few years. Maybe like 2005. Yeah. Oh, this is where they're going to. I thought they were. Yeah, that was what I was playing. Yeah. Well, it's been. Yeah. Oh, that's right. Snowstorms. Yeah. The really unusual snowstorms. Yes. That's right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Excitement. Yep. Right. The kind of excitement we felt. Really. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We would rather not. Oh, that's no problem. Oh, yeah. Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's great. Great. And it'll be like. When you wrap down. Not too bad. Hey, Jim, do you want to come up and Sure. All right, everyone. Well, welcome. We are so happy to be here launching a new season and a new venue for Behind the Baton. And before we even get started, I want to just say thank you to Jim Davidson and let him say a couple words because you're our host here. So.
Well, I appreciate it. Welcome. I'm Jim Davidson. I'm the organist here at First and Calvary. I curate the Musical Offerings Chamber Series, which I left a program on your chair.
And the assistant conductor for the Springfield Symphony.
That's it.
Yeah.
I was getting there.
Okay. Sorry.
I wear a lot of different hats, but it's great. We're happy to have you guys here. We've been neighbors forever, and it seemed like a great logical fit.
Yeah.
We're excited to host you guys, so thanks for being here this year.
Well, thank you. And you know, Jim's humble on the musical offerings. This chamber music series has just been fantastic. Was last year the first year?
It was the first revival of it. Kind of late dormant about 7 years.
Yeah, and so, you know, I do urge you to come and check out the performances. They're terrific. Everyone that we were able to get to last year was great, and so it's a wonderful venue here or in the sanctuary. So thank you for coming right now. This is, of course, Behind the Baton, which is our series with all of our classical concerts of the year. And this is our 90th anniversary season of the Springfield Symphony, which is a really big deal. We're very, very excited for it. And what we usually do in these Behind the Batons is invite our guest soloists. So I'd like you to help me give a nice warm round of applause to Spencer Myer, who is our soloist. And they put out a nice comfy couch. We get to sit down.
All we need is 2 ferns.
Yeah, 2 ferns. That's right. Can you hear us okay if we're talking loudly like this? Is that all right? Well, first of all, this is the opening concert of the season. And for the opening concert of the year, I always like to kick things off with a big bang. And this program is going to do it, for sure. With the symphony side, we're doing Shostakovich's 10th Symphony, which is a monumental masterpiece of the 20th century that will showcase just how good your Springfield Symphony is. And on the first half, I wanted something that was a little more familiar, probably. We've never played Shostakovich's 10th Symphony in Springfield. This will be a premiere performance for us. We have played the Grieg Piano Concerto before, but part of the reason that I chose the Grieg is this is one of the most requested piano concertos that I hear about.
Oh yeah, I'm not surprised.
And I should have said, welcome back, Spencer, because you've been in Springfield, well, you've played with me at least once.
Yes.
Did you play before?
Yeah, 1.5 seconds.
Did you play with Ron before that?
No.
Okay.
No.
So this is your return
Yes.
engagement.
Yeah.
But Spencer is also not a stranger to recitals in Springfield. You've done at least a couple recitals.
Yeah, two. Yeah.
Two recitals over at Missouri State.
Yeah.
And one of them last year was just spectacular. We went last year. It was terrific. So welcome to town.
Thank you. It's so good to be back.
So what I like to do is just kind of kick things off by asking you to, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself? Tell the audience a little bit about who you are and where you came from.
Great. So I am originally from Cleveland, Ohio. Grew up in Cleveland and then grew up sort of in a musical family. My dad, professionally all my life, was an engineer, but his first degree in college was in music. He was a classical guitarist. He went to American University in DC back when he said they had one of the only classical guitar programs east of the Mississippi. And now he wishes he had gone on to grad school after that, because now there are classical guitar programs in every conservatory now. But he was also a very passionate brain, and so he was an electrical engineer. He went back to school when it became clear as a classical guitarist that he could not support a family. So went back to school. He was an electrical engineer, but the music kind of comes from his side. His father was an amateur pianist. His grandfather was also an amateur pianist and a choir director. But nobody in the family practiced music professionally until me. But both my mom and my dad were very, very encouraging of me pursuing my passion when it became clear that was really all that I thought about, and all that I talked about.
I'm going to interrupt you for just a second because we've known each other for a long time.
Yeah.
I didn't know that your dad was a classical guitarist.
Yes.
So I didn't know that part of the story.
Yeah.
Were you ever tempted to do classical guitar?
Yeah, I was never drawn to it really. No. And I was around it all the time, but we also had a piano in the house, and that's really what I was drawn to. Yeah. But he would always play his guitar with me. He had lots of classical records. I remember the famous Van Cliburn platinum selling record from the 50s when he won the Tchaikovsky competition, of the Tchaikovsky Concerto and Scheherazade, and we have a reel-to-reel tape of the two of us singing the Peter and the Wolf themes when I was 3 years old, and I had them all memorized. So,
Wow.
So I would say I was never a prodigy, but the talent and the love for music was always there. It was very clear, and I really I give my dad a lot of credit for encouraging his son in the direction of music, having given it up himself and gone in a different direction. So I really just am so thankful to my parents. I stayed somewhat close to home for undergraduate. I went to Oberlin, which was just 20 minutes down the road from my parents, and I was so glad I went there. I actually wanted to go to Juilliard for my undergrad, and I didn't get in. And so I went to Oberlin, and I'm so glad I did. It was really the best thing for me. And then I set my sights on Juilliard for a master's, and that's where I went for my master's degree. And stayed in New York for the next 20 years, really. I got a doctorate at Stony Brook University because I thought I might want to teach at the university level somewhere down the road. So I went to Stony Brook for my doctorate and stayed in New York and just traveled from New York to do competitions and performances and just kind of develop my career from there. And about, I would say, I guess it was 2016, I had been teaching master classes occasionally when I would go to a performance and really enjoyed teaching. But it came time that I thought maybe I should teach a little bit more seriously. And so I got hired at the Longy School of Music, which is a small conservatory in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I was there for 6 years and really developed a love for teaching that now is really almost equal to performing for me. It's really, I just adore teaching. And then 2 years ago, I was hired onto the faculty at Indiana University in Bloomington. So that's where I am now, and it's a total dream come true. I cannot believe I'm there. I'm pinching myself every day.
So you got to just drive down today.
So I got to drive down today from Bloomington.
Which is great. We were just reminiscing, we can't remember what year we met.
Yeah.
It was 2005 maybe?
5 or 6. Yeah.
Somewhere around there. And you came, this was when I was conducting the Juno Symphony. Yeah. And that was the first time that we performed together.
Yeah.
And we hadn't met in person yet.
Right.
But you were going to do Rachmaninoff First Piano Concerto with us, and got stuck in Seattle in a snowstorm, which is almost never shuts down the Seattle airport. And so Did you make it just for the dress rehearsal?
I think so. I think we
Yeah, I
basically
think we had one run through
Yeah.
on the day of the performance, and so we were just saying it's so nice that he could just drive down and we
Yes.
don't have to worry about snowstorms and so forth. So you really did spend that first 20 years of your career, for the most part, just as a concertizing pianist.
Yep.
And split between recitals and chamber music and orchestra and concerto.
Yeah, split pretty evenly. I always, I'm kind of equally passionate in all the mediums and just love playing the piano. So chamber music, accompanying singers, accompanying string players, larger chamber music, concertos. I think concertos is my favorite thing to do, playing with an orchestra. It's also the rarest experience for a pianist because, you know, every orchestra has maybe 1 or 2 spots for a pianist every season. So, and also in the preparation for a concerto, we're practicing on our own. So the act of finally getting up with the orchestra and having that huge sound behind you and with you is just so incredibly exhilarating and exciting. So that's, I would say that's by a small margin my favorite thing to do, and then solo as well.
Tell us a little bit, because I know you mentioned doing the competition circuit.
Yeah.
And that's a really interesting aspect of music because it's so artificial in some ways. I mean, it's not the same thing as being a performer for a regular audience. So what was that experience like for you? What did it even mean to be on the competition circuit?
Yeah, it's a strange animal, the competitions, because it's an objective medium in a subjective art form. So you're choosing the best artist. I mean, what really is that? So it's, but it's kind of, it has become sort of an industry unto itself, and it's in a way a necessary evil because so many of the competitions provide performance opportunities, and this is how young artists develop their career. There's usually a cash prize, which is nice, but really the prize is really the performance opportunities. And so I did a lot of them, maybe too many, but for about 6 or 7 years of my life, I was doing really big competitions, maybe 3 to 4 a year, where you had to prepare sometimes 2 one-hour recital programs and 2 concertos to be played over a week and a half or 2 weeks. So it's a lot of pressure. And I would say artificial is really a good word because you have to, I felt that my competition trajectory was sort of a journey of learning how to not worry about the jury, how to just walk on stage and feel like I'm just playing for an audience, not count my mistakes on stage, second guessing myself, trying to predict what the jury wants to hear so I'll get the prize. You have to really put all that away, and it's very difficult, and it's a lot of pressure.
So actually what I was going to ask now is, now that you're teaching at Indiana, which is a major music school,
Yeah.
you have students who are obviously outstanding students who are probably about to head in
That church.
right where you were,
Yeah.
you know, when you just got out of school. So how do you prepare them, or do you prepare them for that?
Yeah.
Do you encourage them to do that?
I do encourage them to do that because I think it's, I always tell them that even the competitions where I didn't pass the first round, I gained so much. I've made friends and contacts. I gained nerves of steel because I have never been more nervous for anything than I was for competitions. So the preparation skills, because I would really try to prepare my pieces so that they were so beyond perfect, more scrutinizing than I practiced for a normal recital. So all these things were good things to gain from competitions, and I tell my students that. So I encourage them, but I also try to really tell them how to mentally prepare and how to, you know, be able to walk on stage and just when you walk on stage, you leave it and not worry about it.
You know, it's also an opportunity for you to learn a lot of repertoire.
It is, definitely. Although also some people can fall into the trap if they are doing a lot of competitions, and this is something I tried to avoid with myself, of doing always the same repertoire because they want to be as prepared as they can. So what better way than to play your most comfortable repertoire? And I was doing so many, so I really tried to make it a goal in every competition to do at least one new piece in every competition, so I was always expanding my repertoire.
Do you still fall back? I fall back maybe is a wrong term. Do you still go back and use that repertoire? Is that the basis of what your career has been?
Yeah, I love learning new repertoire, but I love falling back on the old repertoire too. And coming back to it as an older individual and seeing it in a different light. There are always musical choices that you make differently. And I also have learned through teaching so much about my own technique about having to voice technical problems and technical solutions to your students. So I feel my technique has gotten a lot better through the last 8 to 10 years of teaching as well. So
well, let's talk about that for a moment, because that's a really interesting point. You know, I'm sure you've experienced it. I've certainly experienced it. There are, especially at the big music schools, there are a lot of artist teachers who are there because they're big time artists.
Yeah.
Some of them are great teachers.
Yes.
Some of them can't seem to teach at all.
Right. Right.
And I mean, I say that carefully, but you know, some of them seem so intuitive and find their own technique so easy and perfect that they don't have to be able to articulate that.
Yep. You hit it on the head. Yep.
So what was it like for you to make that transition from full-time professional pianist, practicing for yourself, practicing, you know, to perform for audiences, to having to kind of balance that aspect with the teaching side?
Well, I feel that because, as I said before, I was never really a prodigy. Things came fairly easily to me, but not so easily that I never had to think about it and never had to figure things out. So I think that from the first day that I was teaching, I think I brought a combination of the technical and the musical to my students, and I still try to this day, and that's what I think what you're saying is missing in a lot of teachers. But also in terms of balancing my life, I think it just kind of happened naturally. I always, one of the things also I learned in competitions in preparation skills is time management. So what exactly do I need to practice in this 30 minutes that I have between lessons or you know, whatever situation I'm given on a given day, to balance the schedules, to balance the teaching, which is important to me, and the practicing and the performing, which is also important to me because I love it and I want to keep it up. So that just kind of happened naturally, I think. Yeah.
Let's talk about repertoire.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll talk about Breed.
Yeah.
But let's talk about repertoire for a moment, because one of the things that is interesting to me at this stage of my career is the balance between going back to pieces that I've done multiple times, how those have changed for me in my understanding, and also pieces that are brand new. And so what kind of balance do you do? Because it's a little harder to learn new repertoire now.
It is, and memorize it.
And memorize it.
Oh, it's harder to memorize. Yes.
So, you know, for instance, your concerto repertoire, you have a lot of concertos. Yeah. You've played a lot of concertos. I didn't ask you, but I assume you've done the Grieg, you know.
Yes.
Probably many times.
Yeah.
And, but how often do you take up something brand new, a big piece like a concerto, brand new, and start from scratch on it?
Yeah.
And, you know, what's your process like now?
Nowadays, not as often. I think maybe in the last 7 to 8 years, I've learned maybe 3 to 4 new concertos, maybe. But I really, I think from the early days of my undergraduate, not really having a clear idea of what was needed to be involved in the performer's life, I still had sort of a goal that I knew I needed to have a lot of repertoire. And so I really kind of made it a goal every year to learn at least 2 concertos every year. So I was really cranking out the repertoire, and I've always been a good sight reader and kind of a quick learner, so I was able to absorb a lot of repertoire. So I think I gained a lot of my concerto repertoire fairly early on.
Isn't it amazing, just to interrupt, isn't it amazing how when you learned a concerto early on, even if you haven't touched it or thought about it for a decade, it's still there.
It's still there. Yeah.
It's still there.
Yeah.
I mean, it'll take some brush up, but you could probably play one of those pieces, you know.
Yeah.
From memory.
Some of them in a few days.
In a couple days.
In a couple days.
Right.
Yeah. Certainly the ones I practiced for competitions. Definitely. And a lot of it depends on that early learning stage. If you learn really carefully and really dogmatically in those early stages, very carefully, it does stick. So, but I think I really only have a few other dream concertos that I haven't played. I'm very lucky to have played most.
So what are they? What are the ones that you haven't played?
The ones I haven't played, Barber.
Oh,
Barber Concerto.
Yeah,
I adore the Barber Concerto.
Yeah.
I've only played Prokofiev second once. It almost killed me. It's one of the hardest concertos written. So I would love to do that one again. I think Liszt #1. That's another one. It's not necessarily my top favorite concerto, but that's one I haven't played that I do love.
Yeah.
And the two Mendelssohns. I haven't done the two Mendelssohns, which I think are delicious pieces. But both the Chopins I've played, all 5 Beethovens, both Brahms. Brahms 1 I would love to come back to.
Yeah.
Really most of my dream pieces I've done.
So,
very lucky.
Before we get to Grieg, what is your favorite? What are your favorite things to play? Who are your favorite composers? What are the things that you like most to perform, and why?
I would say certainly the 19th century composers are my favorite, because just the high emotional content and the ability to just really channel through making the piano sing and speak to an audience with this incredibly beautiful lyrical music. So Chopin, Rachmaninoff, Grieg, Brahms, Schumann, those are really the composers I connect with the most. As a pianist, certainly in the solo repertoire, some of my favorite repertoire to play just as a pianist is French Impressionists, Debussy and Ravel. Because to be a pianist and to be able to make all these colors and atmospheres and pictures on the piano with sound is just so exciting, and sound, creating musical ideas and beautiful sounds is something I always identified and connected with much more from a very young age than moving my fingers fast and loud. I was much more in this other direction. So that French music I really connect with as well.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but we heard you play Scarlatti, didn't we? Didn't you play Scarlatti? You've done a fair.
Yes.
Yeah, and I actually was really stunned and struck by that, because Scarlatti's a Baroque composer. Ordinarily would have been played on the harpsichord. You were playing on the piano, and it was so beautiful.
Yeah.
Your approach to it was lovely, because it certainly was in Baroque style, but it had a lot more singing color.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you say that about the French Impressionists, because it almost felt, some of that Scarlatti almost felt like French Impressionists.
Oh, I love that.
Music.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
So I think one of the biggest challenges that a pianist faces is to make the instrument sing.
Yes.
Right? Because anybody can go up, all of us, everybody in this room can go up and hit a key and play a note.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, so producing a sound is not hard. But if I give you my flute, some of you might be able to get a sound out of it, some of you might not get a sound out of it, right? But to make it sound like a singing instrument instead of a percussive instrument, so how do you focus on it? Or do you focus on it?
Yeah, well, a lot of it is technique and really how you use your body. And in terms of sound production, I'm talking with my students a lot about the involvement of their entire upper body, and especially the way they direct their weight of their arm in particular through to their hand. So it's not just they're playing vertically with just the hand, but if the arm is involved, it gives a much more rounded attack of the hammer to the string. And it's a very subtle difference, but when there's a very fast, direct, vertical attack, you can hear the percussion in the sound. And it's harsh, and it's unpleasant, and it actually cuts out a lot of the natural overtones of the instrument. So in many cases, it doesn't carry as well in a hall, which is an interesting physical property of the piano. But yeah, a lot of it is really how you use your body. And speed of attack, and how much pressure you use, and being relaxed, and so all these things kind of wrapped into one. And then having an ear for sound, of the kind of long, warm sound that you want to be drawn from the piano that really carries and sings to an audience.
Who are your favorite pianists? Who are your, the ones that you look up to, or that you always enjoy hearing recordings? I mean, living or dead,
Yeah. Certainly Horowitz and Rubinstein. Definitely Horowitz and Rubinstein for different reasons. Horowitz is so colorful and quirky, and Rubinstein is so just regal and just a magnificent, beautiful sound.
Have you seen the YouTube video, the Rubinstein Grieg Concerto?
Oh yes.
Where he's 90 something.
Yes.
And it's astounding.
It's astounding. Yeah.
You can all go, if you all want to prepare for the concert and listen to the Grieg Concerto before you come and hear Spencer do it.
Yeah.
It's a great video on YouTube.
It's a great video. I also love Christian Zimmermann, famous Polish pianist, largely for his sound. It's just a beautiful sound that really wraps around you like a blanket. It's just amazing. Martha Argerich, of course. And she also she keeps putting out these live performances on YouTube, and she's just getting better and better with age. She used to be a pianist that was much more known for her fast fingers and her technique, and she's becoming just a much more really communicative musician. It's amazing. So there's so many out there. I definitely don't have one favorite for sure. Ben Clyburn for sure was an early influence of mine, and I love his really noble musicianship and also his sound. And all these people I wish I had heard live.
Yeah. Tell us about the Grieg Concerto. I mean, you know, I know I invited you to play the piece, but tell us about this piece.
Yeah.
Do we want to move to the piano?
Sure.
We can,
Yes.
You know, do a little bit on the themes.
Yeah. So I think the Grieg Concerto, first of all, is it's important to note that it is a piece actually in 3 movements. Everybody knows the first movement, and every advanced high school pianist competes with the first movement,
right,
as many of my friends did, and I was like, I'm going to learn that Grieg Concerto when I get to college. So it opens with this very famous 3-note descending theme. Then extreme passion, and it's preceded by a timpani roll that crescendos into this big explosive piano thing. So it's quite commanding to open, and really all the way through. There's lots of big virtuoso and really high octane emotional stuff. But then it's juxtaposed with every few minutes there's another wonderful, amazing lyrical.
It's full of melody.
It's really full of melody.
And after that giant theme, the orchestra takes it from you for a little while.
Yeah.
I mean, you start with a bang and then have to sit.
Exactly. Yeah. So in typical concerto fashion, the orchestra states the theme, which is. And that's what I play when I come in, but I restate it after they state it. So it's a really nice conversation between the piano and the orchestra, which is something I really love about concertos as well, is that the interplay that you can have with the orchestra. I don't know that there's as much in the Grieg Concerto as there is maybe in a Beethoven concerto or something, but
you know, there's a
there.
lot.
There's a lot.
It's not like Chopin. On the Chopin concertos, the piano part is amazing.
Yes.
And we try to stay awake in the orchestra. But there's a lot. We do a lot with you. The second movement is absolutely gorgeous.
Yes, it's totally gorgeous. And quickly before we go there, the second theme of the first movement. It's just so beautiful and placid, and really takes you to a different place. But yeah, the second movement begins with low strings, not the low strings, but the string section in kind of a low register, very warm and tender. When the piano enters, it's this soaring, it's not, I wouldn't necessarily call it a melody, but it's a soaring line in the high register.
That's a little like Chopin.
It is, definitely.
It sounds
definitely,
like
yeah.
Chopin. So I had a question. I did a whole bunch of interviews this week, and usually I know all the answers to the questions. And this time I got one I didn't know the answer, which is what kind of pianist was Grieg himself? I mean, was he a virtuoso pianist himself? Or?
He was. I think he was a great pianist. He wasn't a known virtuoso like Liszt was, but yeah, he was definitely a great pianist. And and I know he played his concerto a lot because the edition that I use actually is edited by the famous pianist and famous personality, Percy Grainger, a famous American pianist who heard Grieg play this concerto a lot So he annotated in the score a lot of the kind of the extra things that Grieg would do as he played, and some of the hand divisions that he would do, where things were a little bit more difficult with the left hand, he would take it with the right hand. So that's very revealing. So that shows me that obviously Grieg played this a lot.
I knew that he took it to Liszt. So I mean, when it was in kind of draft form, I mean, I think it was completed. He took it to Liszt, who famously sight-read the whole thing. Without, just put it down and played it and said, "It's great." Maybe do this or that. So I didn't know, if it was take it to Liszt because he wanted a virtuoso's opinion, or just because it's Liszt.
And you can also tell a lot about a composer as a pianist, if they are a pianist, of how good they are based on their writing and how pianistic it is. If it's, and the Grieg concerto it's difficult, but it's not awkward. There's a lot of piano writing of composers who are actually not pianists, where a lot of the demands that they make on the pianist are awkward.
Is Tchaikovsky in that category?
A little bit more than Grieg, yeah, I would say.
Just tell us a little bit about the third movement, because it's pretty spectacular.
The third movement is very exciting. It's so this, I would say, is the movement that really encapsulates how folky a lot of Grieg's music. He's really capturing the Norwegian folk element. He's one of our known nationalist composers, like Janáček and Dvorak, and so this really showcases that you'll hear right like you're taken into a Norwegian dance.
And the whole movement kind of keeps coming back to that.
Exactly. And then in the third movement, there's a middle section that is maybe some of the most gorgeous music. I'll play a little bit of it. It's some of my favorite music.
There's a good cadenza in this.
There's an amazing cadenza.
So what does it mean when we say cadenza?
Yes. So cadenza is a point usually in the first movement. Sometimes you'll hear it in the other movements, but it's usually in the first movement, toward the end, where the orchestra comes to a big stop on a chord, and the pianist is meant to improvise a cadenza generally based on the themes of the concerto. So Mozart wrote 27 concertos, and he wrote several cadenzas for some of them, and some of them he did not. He left it up to the performer to do them. And it's always a freedom of the performer to not do Mozart's cadenzas and do their own. And improvise on the spot, pre-compose them, doesn't matter. But it's something where you develop the themes and you kind of show off. And Grieg wrote his own cadenza, and he put it right into the score, and it really, it's the only one. It's the only one that can ever be done. It's just spectacular. It's a great melding of the themes of the first movement. It's an amazing coloristic display. It's a huge emotional arc. It's just an incredible cadenza. So maybe we'll save that for later.
Save that for later. And in the cadenza, the orchestra, we stop.
Yes.
So we get out of the way. That's the part where we get to take a little breather, and he gets to sweat a lot. But it's really about showcasing. It's often a little more complicated and difficult than the rest of the piece.
It is often, yeah.
Would you say it is in this one?
I would say there are things throughout the first movement and the third movement that are equally difficult.
Yeah. Terrific. Yeah. Spencer, you are a real natural teacher. I mean, I'm sure that it is evident to all of us here. I mean, to hear you talk about this, and I'm sure it's evident to your students. When you are approaching playing a concerto, which you've done a lot of times in your career, how do you prepare differently than when you're doing solo repertoire, knowing that there's an unknown element? I mean, you don't know exactly how, how's the horn player going to fit with you in the horn solo? Exactly. How's the oboe going to fit? So how do you prepare for that?
Well, I think it's twofold. It's two different things of how I prepare. I think certainly when I work with my students on a concerto, I will play with them on the second piano. I'll play the orchestra part, which is always, in all scores, we have a part that's reduced to a second piano. And I will always throw them a few little curveballs where they have to spontaneously adjust their tempo to adjust to the orchestra, or slow down or speed up, or do something that they're not used to, because so much of our practice is muscle memory, and we get used to always playing it the same way every time. So to be kind of on your toes and just to be aware that you have to be ready for certain things, just the awareness is important, I think. But a lot of that I feel I naturally gained through all the chamber music that I've done, and just having to respond to a violinist that I'm playing with, and be spontaneous and speak to them through my music and react to what they're doing. So I do that with orchestras as well, and I've always been very flexible that way. The other thing that I find I have to do much differently when I prepare for a concerto performance is practice louder. It's shocking how loudly, and of course the technique comes into play because you have to make a good loud sound, not a harsh loud sound. But to project to the back of a giant hall over an orchestra so you're always heard you really have to practice much louder than you do for a solo recital. And I tell my students that.
Physically, is that more demanding on your hands?
It is. It's tiring,
for
sure. It's definitely tiring. Yeah. I find, especially now that I have a busy schedule as a teacher, sometimes I will go a day or two without practicing, and then doing a 3-hour session on a big, heavy concerto, my fingers are
tired.
The skin splits sometimes. It's too cold. And, kinds of things.
Well, we're a little bit past our time, but it's okay because it's so interesting. And I do want to give a chance if anybody has any questions for Spencer or anything you want to ask or hear about that we didn't talk about. Yes?
How important, when you are working up a new piece, adding it to your repertoire, how important is it to read the biography of the composer, to read the history of when he or she, a composer, lived, what they were experiencing? Were their romantic affairs important to know? The story about Grieg taking his piece to Liszt, is that important?
Yeah, it is. It's very important. I think it's, I try to bring a combination of both that and also just an understanding of style, how to shape phrases, and all the things that I have learned over the years through my teachers of musicianship, and applying that to what I know to be the composer's style of that period. So that I think helps you to play the piece as well. But yes, knowing historical content and the composer's background and what was going on in their life and history is so important to just emotionally illuminating what they were channeling into their piece when they composed. It's very important. Yeah.
I'm going to answer that too, because I love that question, and because as a conductor, it's the process of learning new pieces very different than as an instrumentalist. I mean, I'm an instrumentalist also, but I'm a flutist as a performer, and so when my teacher would give me a new piece for flute, what do you do? The first thing you do is you open the music and you start playing the piece.
Yeah.
But as a conductor, if I open a score, with 75 lines of music in it, there's no way for me to physically play the piece. Right? I can listen to a piece, but the process of learning is a totally different process of learning music than it is, because you don't have any of the muscle memory.
Yeah.
You don't have any of the physicality aspect to it. And so one of the great things that my teacher of conducting, Frederick Prausitz, did was he really created a way or a methodology to study and learn a score from scratch, meaning starting from zero. And anybody who wants to study conducting, I mean, anybody, when you first want to study conducting, you say, how do I wave the baton? And that is just the least important thing of the whole thing. But when you start, that's all you think about. How do I wave this baton, right? You stand in front of the mirror. Oh, really? For absolutely true. You stand. How does this look? It's the least important. My teacher used to say I can teach a monkey how to wave a baton, but it's the studying of the score. And so one of the things that Maestro Krause did is he didn't expect us to all do it the same way, but he expected us to come up with a way to study. And in his methodology, he asks questions, and that's the starting point. The first question is, what's the name of the piece? The second question is, who's the composer? And that can seem really, really obvious. So Baton, fifth of Baton. But the reason he asked that question is because he wanted you to contextualize what it means to be a symphony by Baton. So it situates it in a particular point in history. And it's a point in history that, for those of us who study music, would understand in the evolution of the form, is the point where we're still steeped in classical rules. This is just an example. We're steeped in classical rules, but now we've moved into an era where the composer is using these classical rules to express their innermost feelings and emotions. And again, that might seem fairly obvious if you're a musician, and you might just sort of skim over that point. But if you back up and really think about it, if you go to a Mozart piece, what was Mozart thinking when he was writing a piece? Mozart was usually thinking, I'm getting paid by the church to do this. It has to be this, or the archbishop's paying me, or Bach, we have Bach's letters, and most of them say, you promised me that I'd get paid this $, and I only got paid this $, and then you gave me a barrel of beer, and that's not enough, and I'd like more, that's going on with Bach while he's writing. It's a craft that he's doing. Obviously, it's art of the highest level also. But when you get to Beethoven or later composers, then there's more of a sense of I'm expressing something for posterity. And so that's where the biography of the composer really becomes important. And on the other half of this concert that we're playing, we're doing a symphony by Shostakovich. And Shostakovich was a Soviet-era composer. He basically lived the same time as Stalin. Their lives kind of intersected, always to the detriment of Shostakovich. Stalin was always, there were times when Shostakovich slept outside his apartment with a suitcase because he knew they were going to come get him. And he thought it'd be better for him to be packed. They'd leave his family alone and just take him. They never did. They never did come and get him. But knowing that is in Shostakovich's life, and then you look at the symphony that we're playing this weekend, and knowing that it was written right after Stalin died, has an enormous impact on our understanding of the piece. And there's more to it, and on Saturday night, we're not doing a pre-concert talk because of the opening night, but I'm actually going to talk about the piece and demonstrate a few things from the stage. Because Shostakovich, for instance, puts his initials into the piece. And many, many times, in many places. And then there's a piece where it starts to sound like circus music, and he never said these words, he never wrote them down, but to me, he's celebrating, I'm dancing on the grave of Stalin, and he said D-S-C-H, D-S-C-H, Dmitri Shostakovich. And if you don't know that about him, you wouldn't really be able to understand the importance of that to the piece as a performer, so that then we can convey that importance to you as an audience member. So that's a longer answer, but it's similar to for playing it on the keyboard, but it's just as a conductor you don't have choice because I don't have a keyboard. Yeah. David.
Yes, on the cadenza.
Yeah.
Did the Granger annotation make any changes to that?
Yes. I can show you, actually. A couple of incredible moments. So there is, let's see. This is toward the beginning of the cadenza, before it builds. So he does these two phrases in a row and settles on this chord. Granger, at this point, Grieg did added this low D to just accompany these two statements, which is one single note, but it's really so effective. It's way down at the low, warm register of the piano, so that was one thing. And then toward the end of the cadenza, we have... just played the octave and re-pressed it with his fingers silently and then took the pedal off. So it does this effect. It's breathtaking. And it's not in Grieg's original score of his cadenza.
How would you notate that? I mean, you would just have to explain it, wouldn't you?
Yeah. He rewrites the note with the octave, and then I think he actually writes the words "depress silently."
Yeah.
And then release the sustained pedal. Yeah.
You know, music as a notation is a very imperfect. It's a language. So the way we see things written on lines and dots is a really good language. But it's filled with facts that are very straightforward, black and white, instructions that we have to interpret or understand. And then if you want something like that, you have to basically go outside the language that we're used to reading and describe it in a different way. That's really cool. That's really good. It's great. Any other questions?
I have a feeling you knew about those. They're just breathtaking effects. I love them.
You're talking so much about romantic music and the expression. As a performer and a teacher, how do you address contemporary music? I mean, taking 12-tone row, Schoenberg and all that, taking it forward. I don't get the impression you haven't said anything that makes me think you may be particularly fond of it, but as a teacher...
It's definitely not my favorite type of music, but I have, over the years I've grown an appreciation for it. But certainly for I apply to my students the same that I do for myself. I really try to find in music like that where it's more dissonant and harder for us to listen to. Sort of finding classical phrasing. Where is there a melody in there? Where is there a contour of notes that relate that we might find sort of just on instinct when we approach a piece by Mozart or Beethoven? So I try to find classical or romantic-ish gestures and directions and things that we can apply to kind of contextualize things in a way. So I think that helps my students a lot. But I always encourage them also to open their minds and to expose themselves to this music, but to study the stuff that they identify with. So I also think it's important for my students to study a variety of repertoire in their formative years. So I don't let them just focus on Chopin. But yeah, it's important.
I'm going to jump on that one too, because I think that's also it's a pertinent question for when we play things in the orchestra that are less familiar to the audience. And I think Spencer's, his idea of treating it in many ways the same way that we would treat Beethoven or Mozart by finding that phrase is really critical. We certainly do that. I think this is not something I've ever read about. This is just something that I think about a lot. I feel like from an audience perspective, one of the things that's great about music is when the composer sets up a question or an expectation and then fulfills it. Then we feel very, very satisfied. I mean, even simply like those chords that Spencer just played, bum, bum, bing, bum, you know where it should go, right? And you want it to go there. And when it does go there, you feel good, right? Yeah. And so when we have music that's written in a language that's less familiar, like 12-tone that you mentioned, and we don't play a lot of 12-tone, But there are a couple pieces that I do because I think they set up those expectations and then they resolve them in a way that's very satisfying. But as performers, we have to pay a lot more attention to that because it's not as evident or obvious, again, from that written page. Whereas you can play Mozart, you've heard it. You've heard little kids play Mozart. It still sounds like Mozart. Yeah, right. I mean, it's still going to resolve. But if the composer gives us choices, then we have to make the choices that make the sense for the audience. Yeah, that's another version of it. Yeah.
Well, you have to build an audience, and so you want them to come back. You want to believe singing the melody.
Of course. Yeah, we want you to come back.
You can't come off.
We definitely want you to come back.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
But you know, I mean, the Rite of Spring was first performed in Paris. The story is that they rioted,
right?
And now to our ears, it's very lyrical.
Pretty normal.
Yeah. Whereas, and I mean, take a prepared piano piece with a strings wrapped in tinfoil and brass mallets and all that sort of stuff. And someday, what will that become?
Yeah.
You know, and if we don't listen to it, we're not going to grow.
Right.
Well,
it's true. It's true.
That is true. Yeah. That is true. But also the pieces that we listen to are the pieces that have been filtered by time and that we've all decided we want to keep listening to.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's part of it. Also.
Yep. You know, exactly.
And the Rite of Spring, which, as you said, is radical, you know, in 1913, you know, is in almost every movie soundtrack that you listen to. I mean, the styles and things. I mean, it's not even unfamiliar to us anymore.
Our eyes. I mean,
Yeah. All right, now we have to wrap it up.
Okay.
Because I have a rehearsal over there. See, now that we're this close, I can go a little bit longer. I just have a lot of questions. I want us to all thank Spencer so much. I want to thank Jim for being our host and first topic. We're so happy to be here. Thank you for coming. We'll see you Saturday night.
Thank you.
You guys are welcome to hang out for a minute.